Since October 7th, we all wake up every morning with a certain degree of anxiety about what we're going to see when we open our phones and we check the news. How many soldiers were killed last night in Gaza? How many rockets were fired into northern Israel by the Iranian-backed Hezbollah? But what happened this morning, I was not prepared for. "Oh my God, Joe Lieberman died," my wife shrieked when she saw the news, and my heart sank. You see, Senator Joe Lieberman wasn't just a great Jewish leader to us. He wasn't just the first Jew to run for vice president. Joe Lieberman was our neighbor and our friend. His kids live a few doors down from us, and he and Hadassah have been here for just about every Jewish holiday since we moved here over 3 years ago. I used to love watching him sit in our small, unassuming synagogue that meets every week in a preschool with his grandchildren, singing, clapping, and even dancing with us as we would greet the Sabbath. He loved Shabbat. He even wrote a book about its quiet power to transform and uplift. And often I would have the chance to walk back with him from the synagogue, and I loved to hear him discuss Israel and world affairs with his sharp, analytical mind. But mostly, he just wanted to talk about his grandchildren and how much nachas he and Hadassah had when they came here. Nachas, for our non-Jewish listeners, is one of those Jewish words that just can't really be translated, but it means something like pride and joy combined. He loved being in Jerusalem, and he would often just sit in our local patisserie with Hadassah, soaking in the special Jerusalem atmosphere. I remember crossing paths with the senator a few days after the horrific attacks of October 7th as he was making his way up from the local grocery. I'll remind you that those were very scary days here, hiding in bomb shelters, very uncertain what was coming next. And I felt a little bad for him that he had kind of been stuck here in this very uncomfortable reality instead of being back home in America. When I asked him if he and Hadassah were okay, if there was anything I could do to help, he looked at me with a large smile and simply said, "I would rather be here right now with the people of Israel than anywhere else in the world." To me, that said it all. I had a chance to interview the Liebermans back in January of 2023. The interview was great, but I have to confess, I was just learning the art of editing and producing podcasts back then. And I never felt that the finished product was good enough to release, so I sat on it. But after hearing the news this morning about the passing of this great human being, a passionate leader and a warrior for Israel and the United States, I decided I had to release the episode. I sent this originally to the senator to listen to it about a year ago. When I saw him shortly afterwards, he was very complimentary. I'm not sure why, but I felt the need to fess up that this had been my first stab at making a podcast. He was quiet for a few seconds, and I nervously awaited his response. "You mean I was your guinea pig?" he asked me with a straight face. I guess you could say that," I responded. After another pause, he looked at me again, but this time his smile had returned. "Well, I'm honored to be your guinea pig," he said. Our hearts go out to the entire family. I know how much he will be missed by his dear wife, by his children, by his grandchildren. We're all going to miss him, and it will always remain one of the great privileges of my life to have had the opportunity to get to know this great man. His daughter Hani posted in our neighborhood chat this morning, "Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, blessed is the true judge." As many of you have heard, my father, Yosef Yisrael ben Hanan, Joseph Lieberman, passed away yesterday evening. He was a very special father, and on an international level, he brought an unparalleled level of glory to the Jewish people because of his Torah observance and integrity. May his memory be for a blessing.
My religious observance, actually, I concluded, was not an obstacle to my success in the secular world. In fact, in some strange way, Baruch Hashem, it actually helped me.
Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut. Not only was he Jewish, but but he was even an outwardly observant Orthodox Jew. And I remember how crushed we all felt when, even though they won the popular vote with over 500,000 more votes than the Republican ticket of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, they were defeated in the Electoral College. Remember those hanging chads in the Florida recount?
A big call to make, CNN announces.
Turn the lights down, the party just got wilder.
Florida goes to Mr. Bush.
Headline of the hour. Folks, it might be premature.
So we take Florida away from George W. Bush.
This is no longer an election. This is like Alice in Wonderland.
The one thing.
Senator Lieberman remained a personal hero to so many of us in the Orthodox community, and we continue to follow his career. In 2011, when he published his book, The Gift of Rest, Rediscovering the Beauty of the Sabbath, I beamed with pride. Here was a senator and a vice presidential candidate telling the world about the power of Shabbat, the great gift of the Jewish people. So when we moved into our new home in the remote neighborhood of Jerusalem, and we learned that Senator Lieberman's daughter and family lived a few houses away, I was excited and hopeful that one day I would have the chance to meet one of my heroes. I remember one Shabbat morning, sitting in our synagogue, I noticed a guest sitting a few rows away, and he looked familiar. I looked a second time, and a third time, and I leaned over to my 16-year-old son and I said, "Hey, I think that's Joe Lieberman." And he said, "Who?" Never mind. But where was the Secret Service? Where were the bodyguards? No men in dark suits and sunglasses. Nah, can't be. He was just sitting there, praying like everyone else, clapping along with the melodies. When it came time for the Torah reading service, as is the custom in most synagogues, they called up this guest for the honor of saying the blessings before one of the Torah passages, and, as is the custom, they called him up by his Hebrew name. Yosef is Hebrew for Joseph. I had my proof. The senator and his wife, Hadassah, are lovely people. Kind of like everyone's Bubby and Zadie, or Saba and Safta, only they aren't. They are American Jewish heroes who have been shining Jewish values to the world throughout their 5 decades of public service. So when the Liebermans agreed to spend some time with me and share some of that light with our listeners, I was extremely excited.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So how are you?
I'm good. Before we start anything, I just want to make sure I have... After a brief exchange of pleasantries, I dove right in with somewhat of an unorthodox question. I asked him which biblical figure he most identified with and why. See, to me, Senator Joe Lieberman was a figure like the biblical Daniel. Plucked from his own home in Judea, the young charismatic Daniel was groomed to become an advisor to the king Nebuchadnezzar. Using his natural gifts of leadership and political acumen, Daniel serves the king and the people of his empire. Despite the intense pressure to assimilate, Daniel keeps firmly rooted in his devotion to God. For example, as his fellow advisors are dining on lavish royal feasts, Daniel refuses the king's food and subsists on nuts and grains, choosing instead to remain loyal to the dietary laws of the Jews. Basically, Daniel shows us that one can retain his integrity and religious convictions and at the same time flourish in the political arena. So in my mind, I had little doubt when I opened with this question that Senator Lieberman would respond that it was with Daniel that he most identified.
And I'm curious if there's a particular biblical figure that you identify with, and if so, why?
Well, I'd probably identify with Yosef because that's my name.
Well, I should have seen that one coming. But the truth is that Joseph also is a character in the Bible who struggled with the conflict between his religious convictions and his political life. So I asked them to share some stories that could highlight that conflict.
I happen to have been fortunate enough to have gotten involved in politics and public service when there were opportunities for me, an observant, religiously observant Jewish American, that probably had not existed before, So I was standing, as they say, on the shoulders of people who had gone before me. Years ago, when my father passed away, I was Attorney General of Connecticut.
Jewish tradition teaches that when someone is mourning the loss of a parent, it's appropriate to refrain from shaving from the beginning of the Shiva, which is the first 7 days of mourning, through the end of the 30-day period known as the Shloshim.
And the rabbi said, yes, you should shave. It's in the interest of the community, etc. And of course, I did not shave. And I will tell you a little anecdote, which is apropos of this, and then I'm going to yield to my wife because I talk too much. So I didn't shave. I went back to work after Shiva. I was being interviewed on television, and the reporter said to me before, wow, I noticed you're growing a beard. Never would have thought you were the type to go hippie on us, Attorney General. And I said, no, and I explained about Shloshi and my father's death. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I really respect that. And then when they did the broadcast of the interview that night, the anchor said, Attorney General Lieberman is growing a beard out of respect for his father, who passed away a few weeks ago. So what can you say? In this sense, the Christian world took it that I was doing this out of respect for my father's memory. So, long story, but it shows how lucky we are, and I have been in my career to have come along at this particular time in this particular country.
Then I asked him if he had any other stories that could illustrate how his religious commitments only made him more respected, and he shared this gem with me.
So many years ago, during the reign of the previous king of Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah, I was in Saudi Arabia as a senator, and I had a meeting scheduled with him. He said, you and I are going to be good friends. And I said, I am confident we will be, Your Majesty. But why do you say that? You are a religious man, and I am a religious man. And that will bring us together. And he then proceeded to begin a conversation about Judaism and Islam, which he really wanted. It went on for more than an hour. And he was really engaged in it. And to his great credit, when we went to the other issues, more earthly and diplomatic, etc., he gave me another 2 hours. So I spent 3 hours with him. But that was such a moment. And so it's there. And of course, it's now as part of the Abraham Accords, you can feel it.
I know what Shabbat dinner looks like in my house. I'd say it's pretty typical. Family, usually lots of guests, amazing food. But what does Friday night look like in the home of a U.S. senator and vice presidential candidate? This was my first question for Hadassah Lieberman.
We invited a few people, and then all of a sudden, Joey's in the midst of votes.
I couldn't leave before Shabbat began. We were voting. My state would be deprived of half of its representation. So I discussed this with my rabbis, and of course, they said you should be there. It's also true that you should try not to violate any of the laws of Shabbat, including riding. So on those occasions, I would walk to and from the house, which at that point, before I had my knees replaced, was a walk I could take, but it was a long walk. It was about 4.5 miles.
So there I was at home. I had prepared in advance of Shabbat. And then I hear from Joe's office, he doesn't know when he's going to make it back, but he'll be walking as soon as they get out. So the people started coming in, and I started, and these were individuals who knew nothing except they were at our house for a Shabbat.
Well, one, if you're thinking about the same, was Richard Holbrooke, who was a great American diplomat and rose to be Deputy Secretary of State.
Then I made Kiddush because there was no one else to make Kiddush. I lit the candles, and we made the motzi. I explained to them about washing their hands, and that was their option. And they did. They all wanted to be part of a traditional Shabbat. And of course, that's very rewarding when you can share what you believe in and to share Shabbat. It's immensely beautiful. So they did it. And then I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I get the watch and Joey's not here yet. Then we had started our main course. And in the midst of all, there's a knock at the front door. And it's Joey with his, the police who were walking him home. And he came in, and it was a really hot night. So he was just sweating hot. Walked in. I said, "Oh, Joey, great." So I went, gave him a kiss. And then he walked in, and the guests were amazed. They knew he walked. They knew this, but they didn't see the after effects of the whole scene. It was a very beautiful evening because they got it and they were amazed. And that was a memorable Shabbat.
It's a great story.
What I really remember from Shabbos was that it was a haven in the middle of the week for us.
That's Hani Lowenstein. She's the only child of the second marriage between the senator and Hadassah. And she and her husband Daniel, and their 6 kids, are our neighbors around the corner. Listen to her as she describes what Shabbat looked like in her home growing up.
My parents created an atmosphere around Shabbat and the importance of it and around our religious observance. It was something that was exciting and that we wanted to be involved in. So on Friday night, my mother and father and we would all daven Kabbalat Shabbat together. And Shabbat day we went to shul, but Friday night we davened together, spirited davening. We had Friday night dinner together, saying Shalom Aleichem. It was a very tight, close family unit. We also always tried to invite people over that might not be at a Shabbos meal otherwise, either because they weren't religious or they didn't have family or they weren't invited. And so we gained so much from them. There was always an excitement about religious observance and about sharing it with people. And there were a lot of times we just would randomly invite people over that didn't have a meal, and they'd come over, they'd have a great Shabbos meal with us. And that's something else that my parents have always done. They've always tried to make everyone feel comfortable and special and cared for. And it didn't really matter to them that my father was the vice presidential candidate or the senator. And we were always very proud of our religious observance, and it wasn't something we were embarrassed about or shy about. We didn't purposely show it off to make others feel bad, but it was something that we were very aware of and proud of.
I asked Hani what other lessons she learned from her parents through those Shabbat experiences.
Something that they also instilled in us as children, that not everyone around you has to be exactly like you for you to keep strong in what you believe in. And I think sometimes for this generation, it's harder to understand. We're looking for people to be just like us, whether it's religiously, politically. So that was a perspective that I gained from my parents.
Do you have any other memories that stick out from Shabbat growing up?
My father, every Friday, would bring flowers home for my mother. It was very sweet. He'd always run to the local Safeway. He would purchase flowers and he'd bring them home and give them to my mother for Shabbat. And that my parents do have, thank God, a very special relationship. And so that was something that he did in the honor of Shabbos, but also in honor of my mother as well.
The senator mentioned these flowers in his book. It seems that he was pretty proud of his tradition. Here's an excerpt from his book, The Gift of Rest.
In accordance with Jewish tradition, I always bring flowers home for Hadassah and our Shabbat table on Fridays. A Capitol Hill newspaper once surveyed members of Congress, asking, among other things, "Do you ever buy your wife flowers?" "Yes," I said. "How often?" "Every week," I said. "Oh my goodness," said the reporter. "You are so romantic." The resulting article nominated me as one of the most romantic members of Congress.
Anyone who keeps Shabbat knows how stressful Friday afternoon can get. Preparing the food, making the beds for guests, washing the floor, setting the tables, trying to squeeze in a Shabbat Shalom call to your family in different time zones. I asked Hani, what was the tension like in her house on Friday afternoon?
there actually wasn't a lot of stress before Shabbos because my mother always made sure, and she always tried to teach me to do that, although I'm not sure I always I always learned the best from her, to do everything ahead of time on Thursday, Friday, early in the day, and to not go into Shabbos with stress. And my father also, he would come back, usually at a good time. He'd try to come back early enough. And we actually, our Shabbos was very family oriented, and Shabbos was always a gift to us, as my father calls his book, The Gift of Rest.
We have a little tradition at our Shabbat table. We always ask everybody, my kids are very tired of it by now, everyone at the table, we ask them the same question if they're new, if they've never been before. And the question goes like this, and I'd like to ask both of you this question. If you could spend one entire Shabbat with anybody that ever lived, related, not related, whoever you wish, who would that person be? Who would you love to spend right now, this next Shabbat with?
Wow, that's a great question.
Anybody, could be anybody.
Oh,
we've had people say Abraham Lincoln before.
I was just going to say Abraham Lincoln. I must say that we were fortunate to spend parts of Shabbat with somebody who I would wish I could spend Shabbat with this week and any week, which is Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. He was wise, very learned, and stimulating, thought stimulating. How about you, darling?
Well, I think it's probably an odd answer, but I wish that we could spend a Shabbat with a few from various faiths, like including Arabs in a Shabbat, where we could have an influence and a positive feel together and show how Judaism is very much into blessing the world. And I think toward a positive, especially for Israel and in general against anti-Semitism, that would be helpful. So that would be one of them.
Oh, that's a lovely thought.
Okay, one last story before we move on about an unusual Shabbat spent with Al and Tipper Gore. Here's David Kornbluth reading again from The Gift of Rest.
The most remarkable portable Shabbat we ever celebrated was with Al and Tipper Gore. It was about 15 minutes before Sabbath was to begin. The phone rang. It was Al again. "It's not sunset yet, is it?" he asked. "No," I answered. "Then why don't you and Hadassah pack up whatever you need and do Sabbath in our house?" Al suggested. "We're having a party here to celebrate the court decision, and you should be part of it." So Hadassah and I gathered up candles, wine, challah bread, dinner, everything we needed, and hurried out to the Secret Service limousine that we had during the duration of the campaign. We made it to the residence just before Shabbos. Most of the key people in the campaign were there, and the atmosphere was jubilant. When we arrived, the Gores greeted us with hugs and high fives. Tipper asked Hadassah what she needed to do first to prepare for the Sabbath, and she said she needed to light the Sabbath candles. Tipper asked if I needed a quiet place to pray. I said I did, and she led Hadassah and me into their living room and closed the doors to give us privacy. I faced east, towards Jerusalem, according to the traditional Jewish practice, and prayed the service of Kabbalat Shabbat, welcoming the Sabbath, and Mariv, the evening prayer. When I finished, I turned around to leave the room and beheld a surprising backdrop for my Sabbath prayers, which I somehow hadn't noticed on coming into the room. There behind me, all lit up and beautifully decorated, was the Gore's Christmas tree.
A few months ago, our neighbors, Hani and Daniel, had their first baby girl, and that was after 5 boys in a row. And of course, Senator and Mrs. Lieberman flew in for the celebration. I asked Hani about the significance of the name that they chose.
We were very blessed this past fall to have a baby girl who we named for my grandmother, whose name was Ella, and her Yiddish name was Elka, and we named our baby Nava Elka, which means beautiful Elka, or beautiful Ella. To be able to raise my daughter, God willing, in Jerusalem after my family was killed in Auschwitz, where they could not have imagined they would have relatives that would get to Jerusalem and have children here. It's a tremendous blessing and one that I'm extremely thankful for.
To have those balloons, and then there were small balloons inside the big balloon with her name, Nava Elka, made me think about my parents, my mother, Auschwitz, Dachau, my father, slave labor camp, and how to have a granddaughter who has her name as part of her from my mother. And so my mother really was able to make Aliyah. Was so emotional for me because it was a way to celebrate the future while we mourn and recollect the past, the Shoah, everything ugly. And yet, here's a vision of newness. So we were just thrilled. Right, Joey?
Oh, absolutely.
If you speak to 10 different people who made Aliyah, you'll probably get 10 different reasons why they chose to uproot their family, their lives, and to resettle in this place, which can be pretty challenging at times. We all love to ask each other this question. It's a pretty common topic when we're sitting around together with other people who made Aliyah. So, of course, I had to ask Hani.
I felt like in order to actualize and move forward from the pain that everyone had felt so much, the moving to Israel was the next natural step, and setting up my life here and my family here and continuing the chain of the Jewish people for myself, but also for my children and their children and, God willing, their children, and so on and so forth. For me, Aliyah was a natural continuation of the growth that I wanted to see in my Torah observance and my connection to God.
And of course, there's the question of how our parents deal with this. For most of us, I would say this is probably the hardest part about making Aliyah. Yeah, it is pretty cool to be following in the footsteps of the Jewish patriarch Abraham, who followed God's command of Lech Lecha, to leave his birthplace and his parents' home to travel to the Promised Land. But the truth is, at least for me, that really doesn't make it any easier. So I wanted to ask Hani how her parents handled the news that she was making Aliyah.
Aliyah can sometimes be challenging for parents to accept. The good news is that I had prepared them and told them that I was going to make Aliyah after I spent a gap year in Israel. And I ended up meeting Daniel and marrying Daniel, and we knew from when we were dating that we both wanted to make Aliyah. So my parents had been prepared for us to move for some time. They believe in going after your dreams and living by your values. And so it was not something that they felt like they could just say, oh, don't do it because it'll be easier if you stay in the U.S. It was something that they felt like, you know what, go live out your dream with your family that you want to live out there in Israel. They feel very proud that we're here.
They come.
Yeah.
They come a lot.
They do come a lot. Of course, they would like to see the grandkids, especially the new addition. And they come and they love being here and they enjoy the time they spend here and they enjoy seeing the modern day miracle that is the state of Israel.
Sounds good, but what does her father have to say on the matter?
For centuries, millennia, the Jewish people were pleading, praying, hoping for a return. And 7 of our 13 grandchildren are living in a modern Israel. It's really quite remarkable.
My math isn't so good, but I think that's more than half.
It is 7 of 13, and we have 6 here in the U.S. So, Baruch Hashem. father's mother came to America alone in the early part of the last century. She had 7 or 8 siblings. They all made Aliyah, some really early. One, Moshe Segalovich, is buried at Tel Chai, right in the front row. He died with Trumpeldor in defense of Jewish settlements. So to me, the fact that Hani and Daniel made Aliyah is like the picking up this torch that my father's mother's family took long ago to Israel. The modern Zionist movement and the reestablishment of the state of Israel is one of the extraordinary events of my lifetime, really a blessing.
So do you feel like the future of the Jewish people is in Israel? Do you feel like we're witnessing the prophetic ingathering of the exiles that the prophets speak about? And do you think that Jews in America should be thinking about Aliyah? Should that be a discussion and a conversation?
Numerically, demographically, the center of the Jewish population in the world is now in Israel, which is appropriate. I mean, it's the Jewish nation, the Jewish homeland. I do think about the ingathering, and it's increasingly evident when Hadassah and I go, and we feel this and note it, that the population in Israel is remarkably diverse. Ethiopian Israelis, French Israelis, bringing, as you well know, Rabbi, very excellent patisseries to your neighborhood. So my guess is that a lot of people will continue to live in the diaspora, in Galut, and that has its place in Jewish reality, also in Jewish history in terms of being supportive of each other. But I think the center of world Judaism has now moved from the U.S. To Israel. So it's a remarkable time, and we're very proud, frankly, that our kids have decided to make Aliyah.
Now is my chance to bring the discussion to a bit of a more edgy place and to push the senator a little on some issues that tend to divide American Jews from their Israeli counterparts.
Jews in America. David Ben-Gurion once said that for 2,000 years, the Jews were a people without a state. And then all of a sudden, he realized that we were a state without a people. His assumption was automatically, as soon as he declared the state of Israel, all the Jews from all out throughout the diaspora would come running immediately to Israel. In 1960, the New York Times quoted David Ben-Gurion as saying, "In the free and prosperous countries, Judaism faces the kiss of death, a slow and imperceptible decline into the abyss of assimilation." I'm curious, your feeling about that and the issue of assimilation in America versus in Israel.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ben-Gurion was a wise man, and in his way, prophetic. In my opinion, there's no place in our history outside of Israel where Jews have had more freedom and opportunity and respect than in the United States. However, that comes with the challenge. Can you stay identified? And of course, demographically, we see the rate of intermarriage and assimilation is quite high here. So it's quite different than in Israel, although Israel, of course, has its own problems. There's very little intermarriage because there's very few people you can marry who aren't Jewish in Israel. But we're always struck by the continuing religious divisions in Israel. A heartening note is that there appears to be a real desire from people in Israel who are not Dati for more religious observance, not to become Dati, it's certainly not Haredi, but to sort of pick up some of the spiritual lift to it, observe Shabbat a little bit more. Not fully, but to bring that into their lives. So I hope that there'll be enough peace and fewer external threats to Israel that Jews in Israel can learn how to get on better religiously with one another.
Particularly religious Jews who have commitments have to be more understanding and inclusive. If they have a Shabbat table and they have neighbors who are not Shomer Shabbat or not religious, they have to invite them in. And yet part of what happens is everyone lives in separate little sections that only have people like themselves. And that's very dangerous. We have to teach our children to be outgoing and inclusive.
There's one topic that I do want to get to, which
Please.
is, I remember growing up feeling that Israel was a great source of Jewish pride, and that we had our own country that could defend itself. And then talking to young people today, especially on university campuses, I'm not sure that same unequivocal love for Israel exists. I feel like the younger people are conflicted a little bit more. I grew up in a home of Jewish Democrats, and I never felt there was any conflict whatsoever with my, the democratic values that I grew up with in my home and Zionism. But today, I think it's maybe shifted. And there was a Pew study in 2018 that 79% of Republicans say they sympathize more with the Israelis than the Palestinians, but only 27% of the Democrats surveyed or polled in that Pew report said that they sympathize more with the Israelis than the Palestinians. When you take a look at a recent study here in Israel, a recent poll found that in Israel, 67% of young Israelis identify themselves as right-leaning. And we saw that in the recent elections with people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich being elected to the government. My question really for the two of you is, in your experience of over 50 years in the political arena, have you seen this change take place? What do you think is the root cause of this shift? Is it the general swing to the left in America? And what does it say about the future of nonpartisan support for Israel in the United States? And do we have to fear some kind of split happening? I'll just end by saying that I read in a beautiful book by Daniel Gordis. He said that in a sense, Israel is a red state and Jews in America are like a blue state. So is that divide something that's going to continue to grow? Is it something that we have to be concerned about or worried about in the future?
Yeah, that's a really big and important question. So look, the reality is, and now we've been involved 50 years. I know. But you learn a lot, you experience a lot, so attitudes change. And I'm fascinated by that number, incidentally, Rabbi. About 67% of young people in Israel tending right. That's really fascinating.
Yeah. Here
in the U.S., I have watched now a flip in this sense. The Democrats were, I would say, reflexively pro-Israel. But there was thought to be no inconsistency between being liberal politically and supporting Israel. The Republicans were not hostile to Israel, but they were not reflexively pro-Israel, to put it that way. Over time, that's flipped. And based on the numbers you cited, which I think are accurate, that Republicans are now the reflexively pro-Israel party, whereas the Democrats are no longer reflexively pro-Israel. In fact, there's a significant element within the Democratic Party that I would say is more overtly anti-Israel, and I fear in some sense anti-Semitic, small group, but it's there and in office more than anything I experienced in my 24 years in the Senate. But on the other hand, here's what I'd say. Thanks to a lot of effective advocacy by the pro-Israel community in America, Jewish and Christian, the majority of members of Congress are pro-Israel, both parties. But if there's an alarming trend here, it's in the increase in opposition to Israel among younger Americans. I mean, look, AIPAC is working on that with a lot of focus on more liberal groups, minority groups, which are growing in numbers, and hopefully they can bring it back to the bipartisan support for Israel that existed for most of my time in public service. But it's not to be taken for granted. And in some sense, Israel benefits because it's better than the alternative. That is some of the other, like the Palestinian leadership or the Iranian leadership, but it's a more complicated relationship now, and we can't take it. We can't take American support for Israel as automatic as it used to be. You want to
And
add
I
something?
guess
Yeah.
my reaction to what you've asked is that when I think about the stuff we read about the early days of Nazism, of Hitler, and how there were a lot of assimilated Jews in Germany. The younger generation was totally assimilated. And they believed in that assimilation, that would retrieve them from any problems. And they ended up the exact same way as everyone. So there are some lessons that have to be looked at from our past. And it's frightening. And in some ways, look, the American young person has gotten cozier and assimilated. People have got to wake up and understand we're not there the way we were there.
So just add this, you asked, why is this happening? I remember my dad telling me an old phrase: if you're not a socialist before you're 30 years old, you have no heart. And if you're a socialist after you're 30 years old, you have no head. There are a lot of young people today who are applying an overall liberal attitude toward Israel, and they believe that Israel is no longer the post-Shoah country where victims have gone. It's now mighty militarily, economically, and of course they also feel it is the oppressor of the Palestinian people. The current Netanyahu government with, people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and it's already arousing a lot of criticism, skepticism, concern here in the U.S. about where Israel is going. Clearly, there's been a move to the right.
Are you concerned about that?
Yeah, I am, because of the impact. But I must say, I say to people here, hey, the people more on the right were elected. It was a real democratic election, open, free. Okay, we're uneasy with most Americans, including most American Jews, uneasy with some of the policies. It's a little bit like saying, I'm going to leave or castigate the Republican Party because of this right-wing Freedom Caucus they have, or I'm going to leave the Democratic Party because of the left-wing Ocasio-Cortez, Tlaib, Omar, et cetera, Well, they were elected too. So we have to oppose them on the merits of their positions. Also, I do believe that they don't really reflect Bibi Netanyahu, but he needed them to form the government to become prime minister. So the next couple of years is going to be a test. Now, I'm very pleased so far that the Biden administration has taken this position, as you know, toward the Netanyahu government, which is that the Biden administration will judge the Israeli government by what it does, not by what various members of the government say. And that's a restrained position, probably more restrained than a lot of people in the administration feel about the Netanyahu government. Bibi and Biden know each other for a long time. And I think neither of them wants to have a repeat of the hostility that seemed to emerge at one level between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So hopefully they can manage that through what will be not easy times. But we have all the hope of the Abraham Accords. I'm really pleased, incidentally, that Ron Dermer has returned to the government. I know him well and have great respect for him. He will be very helpful in relating to America, and I believe he'll also be very helpful in trying to nurture and expand the Abraham Accords, which are very popular across party lines here in the U.S.
Okay, I have one last question for you. This is my last question. What is Israel's greatest export to the world? High-tech microprocessors, drip irrigation, or something else?
Well, of course, I believe it's the whole system of values that comes from both the Brit, the covenant with Abraham, Abraham, our father, but also from the Torah. I mean, this is at the heart of Western civilization, monotheism, Christian and Muslim, and it's a value system, but it's also the centrality of the rule of law, which really which distinguishes us from other systems, other civilizations, which are largely totalitarian and unfair, lacking opportunity. So to me, for Israel to be the light to the nations, I think I'm very proud of all the technological advances. Every time I use the Waze, I'm very proud and grateful. But really, the great contribution of the Jewish people and modern Israel, more and more hopefully, is